future and all they see is uncertainty. Crushing uncertainty about what will happen. Now, why have we got to this particular moment in this way? First of all, because the referendum was called because of divisions in the Conservative Party, and I don't say that to make a party political point, because the truth is, the 1975 referendum, which happened just after I left Sussex, was called by Harold Wilson because of divisions in the Labour Party. And in the intervening 45 years, the two parties, in terms of their attitude to Europe, passed each other, moving in the opposite direction. That's what's happened. But David Cameron couldn't deal with it. UKIP was rising in support, so he thought, I'll have a renegotiation of referendum. Harold Wilson did it, it worked for him, it'll work for me. Well, it didn't work for David Cameron, and the result was for leave. Since then, the Prime Minister decided to trigger Article 50 at a particular date. I think Parliament was on a bound to trigger Article 50. People wrote to me at the time and said, you don't have to do it. And I said, look, I was a passionate Remainer, I campaigned for Remain, I voted for Remain, but I'm also a Democrat. And this was not a straw poll of the nation. It wasn't like the government said, we're having a bit of trouble with Europe. Just quick show of hands, what do you think about this as opposed to that? No, it was quite clear the referendum was handing a decision to the British people, and that's why I did vote to trigger Article 50, because I think we have an obligation. And to those of you who might still think that we should not have done so, if you think we have a crisis of confidence in our politics today in our country, as in many other countries around the Western world, the United States of America and elsewhere, what we have today is nothing compared to what we would have if Parliament had said, you know what, that was all very interesting, we're not going to pay any attention, you didn't know what you were doing, we know best, go away, we're going to carry on as things were before. That could not happen. That's my view, others may take a different view. And then following that, there was basically a year and a half of open argument in the Cabinet about what to ask for. Now, it's very, very unwise to enter into a negotiation against a ticking clock, 2 years, tick, 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 and spend most of the time arguing amongst yourselves what to ask the other side for. So a huge amount of time was wasted. Finally, the Chequers proposals were agreed. They were then rejected by the European Union. Because from the very beginning, when we first went to see Michel Barnier's Select Committee, he said, look, you're leaving, there are two broad choices. For the future, you can have a deal like Canada, or you can have a deal like Norway. And it's your choice. But what you can't have is some cherry-picked variation. They're very big on not having cherry-picking in the European Union, although there are cases where the EU itself engages in cherry-picking. So we might return to that in the questions. Well, the government didn't want to make either of those choices, and we've ended up with an agreement that is in effect a divorce arrangement. It is not our future partnership with the EU after we have left, because we haven't even negotiated it yet. So the withdrawal agreement takes two parts, as I'm sure you will know. There is the legal treaty, which covers the money we owe, protecting the rights of citizens, EU citizens here, Brits abroad, the transitional period, in which basically everything stays the same, although we don't have a seat at the table, and the Northern Ireland backstop, which is currently the subject of the Prime Minister's latest tour around Europe. Now, the truth about the Northern Ireland backstop is the reason it's in there is because the Prime Minister created the problem the moment she stood up and said, we're leaving the single market and the customs union. Now, the moment you say that, what are you going to do about the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic? Because you're not going to be in the same customs area, you're not necessarily going to have the same rules and regulations. How can you have the free flow of goods across that border? Now, I don't know how many of you have been to the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. Anybody? Yeah, well, there's quite a few. And I went for the first... No, I have crossed the border before on holiday, but we went to the Select Committee about a year and a bit ago. We went to Middletown in Armagh. And you stand, and literally we stood on one side of the road, and never, I think in the field of politics, have so many MPs been photographed by so many photographers looking at a piece of tarmac, because that's what we did. And the only reason you could tell you're standing on an international border is because the line on the side of the road here is yellow, Republic of Ireland, white, Northern Ireland. Now, when you lifted your eyes to look around, over there, we stood on this side of the road, Northern Ireland Republic, there was an old crumbling building, and the guy who was showing us around said, well, that used to be the customs post. But of course, it's not used anymore. You remember the new housing estate we passed as we drove into Middletown? That's where the police barracks used to be. They've got it. Over there is where the army base was. If you've been here 40 or 50 years ago, there were watchtowers everywhere, and people were murdered. Armagh. People were murdered all over Northern Ireland. But Armagh had a particular reputation. And the Good Friday Agreement of 20 years ago was an astonishing piece of, it was an astonishing demonstration of what political courage can achieve. Because in a conflict, and the world is full of long-standing conflicts, it is easier, in one way, to say, I am the victim, you are the oppressor, you're the oppressor. And then the person on the other side of the table says, no, 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 I'm the victim, you're the oppressor. And you can carry on like that till the cows come home, but you don't make any progress. And what happened was, a number of things happened, and it's a long and complex story, but in the end, the parties realised, you know what, we live in the same small place, we're going to have to learn to live alongside each other and respect different traditions. And the point about the Northern Ireland Peace Agreement is it said to the citizens of Northern Ireland, you can be Irish, you can be British, you can be both. You don't have to choose. And the point about the border is not just about trade, it is about the psychology of the peace process. You move back and forth. People live on one side, their kids go to school in the other. They live on this side, they worship at a church in the north. They go and play tennis in another country. And to all intents and purposes, the border does not exist. And that's why everybody involved in this negotiation agrees that that must remain as it is today. Because the Good Friday Agreement was in part made possible by the joint membership of the Republic and the United Kingdom of the European Union at the time. But there's a problem, because if Britain has a different system from Ireland, at some point, Ireland has to be able to show that any goods coming into the Republic meet the standards of the customs union and the single market. It can't leave a big back door open. And at some point, someone will go to the court and say, the back door's open, you need to tell the Republic of Ireland to close it. So, the backstop is the guarantee that in all circumstances, the border will remain as it is today, while, hopefully, the parties negotiate a new relationship that will keep the border as it is today. And that's why the argument that's being made, we must have a time limit on the backstop, well, it doesn't make sense. It's like saying, I'll take out an insurance policy on the house, but it's going to have a time limit, and if a fire happens after that, you're not going to get covered. Well, that's that not use. So, people calling for a time limit, it will last as long as it lasts if it ever comes into use, until such time as you've negotiated a new relationship that keeps the border open. It's very simple. If you can replace it with something else, then you don't need the backstop anymore. The second ask is, well, why can't one of us pull out? Same problem. If one of us pulls out, and there isn't another method of keeping the border open, you've got a problem. They may end up with some kind of arbitration, I don't know, in the next few days. But it is a problem created by the Prime Minister, and she is now, in effect, impaled on a problem entirely of her own making when she uttered those fateful words, William the single market in the customs union. Now, I don't really have a problem with the withdrawal of Britain. My problem is with the political declaration and our future relationship. Because if you look at that, all 26, 27 pages, it's like a menu. And you can look at it and say, I think I'm going to order that, or I'm going to be like Norway, I'm going to be like Canada. But for businesses, for universities, for every area of national life, and I mean every area of national life, if I thought I understood 2.5 years ago when I became the chair of the Select Committee that I knew much about the nature of our relationship with the European Union and the impact on all parts of our country, I knew barely anything at all. And I've learned an enormous amount from talking to and listening to to a lot of people over the last 2.5 years. But we don't know what the future holds because we haven't even negotiated. So if businesses say to me, Hilary, I know how it works today, this is what I make, this is why I export, how's it going to work in 5 years' time? You're a parliamentarian. I have to look them in the eye and say, I'm really sorry, I can't tell you because I haven't got a clue. Now, the reason I voted against the deal is it cannot be right for the Prime Minister to ask parliamentarians to put something through where we have no idea where we're going to end up, and this is absolutely fundamental to the future of our country. This is a once-in-a-several-generation decision, probably the single most important vote any of us who are MPs currently are going to cast. Now, for that to change, the Prime Minister has to change her red lines, but she won't. Jeremy Corbyn wrote her a letter yesterday and set out what Labour was looking for. But on the basic first item, which is we're going to need to stay in the customs union, well, of course we're going to need to stay in the customs union. Because if you don't stay in the customs union, you don't even begin to solve the problem of the Northern Ireland border, and you don't begin to solve the problem of ensuring the continuation of friction-free trade. Without checks, all free trade areas that have agreements with other countries have some checks on the border. True between Canada and the United States, between Norway and Sweden. We did an inquiry as a committee. And therefore, if you don't want checks, which you absolutely can't have in Northern Ireland, and if you want to keep just-in-time delivery flowing across the Channel, you need effectively a customs union in the single market. That is the truth. The Prime Minister won't take that decision because the politics of the Conservative Party, it seems, don't allow her to do that. And that is why we are in a mess. And I think it is now inevitable that Article 50 will be extended. But our absolute priority in the House of Commons at the moment is to ensure that there is not, on the 29th of March, a no-deal Brexit. Now, I know some people write and say, I'm perfectly happy with the no-deal Brexit. It's an orderly managed WTO agreement. Now, Alan, are you still in the room? Yeah, well now, the wonderful Alan Winters, who is sitting up the back there, him and his team and others have produced a lot of fantastic advice. Alan came to give evidence for our Select Committee. What is this orderly managed WTO Brexit? Well, no one I've met can explain what it is. As far as I'm aware, I think the only country in the world that trades literally solely on WTO terms, it's said that North Korea does, but not many other countries, because most other countries have some kind of agreement with somebody else. So what is this no-deal Brexit? It is basically pulling the plugs out, and the damage to the economy, well, the government's told us about the damage because it produced its economic assessment in the autumn, and this will have the biggest hit on our GDP compared to what it would otherwise be if we leave without a deal. It would be utterly irresponsible, and I'm never going to vote for it. Parliament indeed voted last week to reject a no-deal Brexit, but if the Prime Minister continues to insist it's my deal or no deal, then we will need to take legislative power to require her to apply for an extension. Now, I want to say two other things, and then we can get into questions. There is debate about a referendum. Honestly, in the House of Commons at the moment, there is not a majority for a referendum, second referendum. One of the problems with it is we don't actually know what the Brexit deal we are voting on looks like, because the really important bit, which is the future relationship of trade, services, security, consumer safety, access to databases to protect us from people who would do us harm, all of those things, we haven't negotiated it yet. So how can we pass a judgment on the thing called Brexit when the really important bit hasn't yet been clarified? Now, my own view, and there are one or two others who are making the same argument, is this: we should take a different approach now. We should say, look, why does the House of Commons not vote for the Prime Minister's deal? Because we look at what's on offer, and we're uncertain in different ways and for different reasons about what the future may bring. The ERG thinks the backstop will be permanent, and me and the Labour Party and others say the future is completely uncertain. This is, people talk about blindfold Brexit, stepping into the unknown. That is a very irresponsible thing to do if you're an elected member of Parliament. Why don't we now negotiate the future relationship? Now that would require extending Article 50, not just for 3 months, but probably 2 or 3 years. You can then park the withdrawal agreement. You don't have to think about the backstop now, because you don't need it. You put it in the corner, because we would remain, we would be paying into the budget, stay in the single market, customs union, free movement, court of justice. But if the deal goes through, we're going to be doing every single one of those things anyway in the transitional period, potentially up to the end of 2022. So the only difference between doing it that way and negotiating the future relationship after we've left and doing it the way I'm arguing for is we don't have a seat at the table. Well, I think it would be better for us to have a seat at the table during this process rather than not have a seat at the table. And at the end of it, we would all know what Brexit looked like. And then people would take their decisions, whether it's Parliament approving it or maybe the people approving it in a referendum at that point. Now, I think that would be a much more sensible way forward, because at the moment we're stuck and we need to find a way forward. Now, I just offer that as a suggestion because we are in a mess. And the final thing I would say is, if you also ask me, as many people do, so how's this all going to turn out, Hilary? I have to look you in the eye and say, as things stand at the moment, I really don't know. But the future of the country depends on how it does turn out and our ability to make our politics work, to manage all of these competing pressures, demands and feelings and views, try and bring the country back together again, in which, in my view, everyone's going to have to compromise. You can either have an outright victory from one side or the other, but that isn't going to be any good for the future of our nation. We're all going to have to compromise and to find a way forward. I have argued for membership of the European Economic Area via the EFTA route for those who are interested in the details, and a customs union, because that would minimise the economic damage, keep a close relationship in many areas, but we get out of the fisheries policy, the CMP and other things, not quite subject to the European Court in the same way. Other MPs have a different view. In the end, you're only going to agree on something when there is a proposition that the majority of parliamentarians or majority of British people are prepared to back. I will stop at that point and we can go to questions, comments and contributions. Are you going to run this, Peter?
Yes.
Right, so who's first? Don't be bashful. Right, you're picking.
Jump in front.
Okay.
And we'll take another one.
Yeah, sure.
We'll set it to you.
Is this one? Yeah.
Just so, yeah, go on.
So you say...
What's your name?
Henry.
Henry, hi.
Yeah, hi. So you say that you want to extend Article 50.
Yeah.
However, after the Supreme Court's judgment in Miller, Mark Elliott says that Parliament could have opted and it could have put itself in the driving seat and it could have made conditional arrangements upon the government to create negotiating terms. So he says, doubtless it would have been difficult for Parliament to agree upon what those objectives should have been, but at least that would have required the government to adopt a clear position, and that would have enabled Parliament to evaluate that position. So, if extending Article 50 is what you want to do, why, after the Miller's case, why didn't Parliament take the driving seat and make clear terms that the government should negotiate and upon Parliament's terms? And also, what can we learn from Brexit?
How long have you got? There will be an inquiry in the years to come about what happened, and something else may come out of that. But I'll come back to you.
Joseph?
Hi.
Sorry, where are you? You need to wait. Oh, right.
Hi.
Hi, what's your name?
Ben.
Hi.
If not opposing Brexit could lose the Labour Party potentially 45 seats, what's the future of socialism in this country post-Brexit?
Right, okay. Right, to come to your question first. Remember, the Conservatives had a majority until Mrs May very unwisely decided to call an election and lost her majority. And it's strange to look back now, but there was a time when you would ask the Prime Minister, so what's the plan? What are you going to ask for? And she would stand there and she would say, Brexit means Brexit, and I'm not going to give you a running commentary. Now those are real quotes from the Prime Minister on the biggest single choice the country has faced in peacetime, which is simply not good enough. So the Select Committee said, well actually, you need to publish a white paper on what you want to see, which eventually they did. You are going to have to give Parliament a vote on the deal. She didn't want to do that to start with, and in the end she was persuaded, can't really get the government to approve this and Parliament doesn't get a chance. It's a fair and interesting question, but I think prior to the election in 2017, the government would have a majority to say, we'll keep our negotiating mandate in exactly the way that we want. And they didn't want to go into too much detail, because the moment they go into detail about things like customs union and single market, they split apart. So her strategy was to keep it vague. And then finally to force people at Chequers in the summer to back a plan that was a very complex arrangement to try and keep the benefits of the customs union and bits of the single market without calling it staying in the single market and customs union. And the EU looked at it for 2 months and then said, I'm afraid this isn't acceptable because you're trying to mess with our system. And we won't allow you to mess with our system. You can adopt a model we understand, Canada, in a way, but you can't mess with the system. Now the government may come back and say we want to give Parliament a role in agreeing the mandate for the next phase. I think the problem with that is to do with trust. Because we might agree a mandate, a new Prime Minister, Conservative Prime Minister may turn up, and grab the tiller of the boat of state and say, you know, you all thought we were heading for Norway, well actually we're not. We're now going off in the direction of Singapore or Canada or somewhere else. So there's not a lot of trust about where the government may seek to go. I don't think what you're proposing now is in any way incompatible with my suggestion that we extend Article 50 for an extensive period and negotiate the future partnership, because either way the government will be confronted very quickly with having to make the choices it has refused to make thus far. Because the moment the negotiations begin on the future partnership, the EU will sit there and will say, well, good morning, how are you? I'm fine. What do you want? What do you want? And the government will have to make a choice. Now, it clearly would help if Parliament was behind that, but if the Prime Minister isn't prepared to move at all in the first instance, then I think it is extremely difficult. But I think you raise a fair point, and it is a lesson that we need to learn. Labour and you're referring to the recent polling, Ben. Look, the truth about Labour is this. We had about roughly 70% of our supporters who voted Remain and 30% who voted Leave. And so a political party is thinking now, what can we do to try and reflect the views of people who hold very different views? We lost the referendum. That's a kind of starting point for the conversation. We lost, we the Remain side, we lost. And that's why we're in the mess that we are. And the Labour Party conference, I'm sure you've followed it, adopted its policy, which said we want an election first. We had the vote of no confidence. We didn't win. There won't be an election unless some Tories are prepared to bring down their government. I don't see any sign of that at the moment, even though they hate the Prime Minister's plan. I don't personally think the Prime Minister's going to call an election. Didn't go very well last time, did it? Now, I'm not complaining about that. And I'll jump at the chance for an election and a change of government, but I'm not sure she'll do it because she comes back, says she has a majority of 10 or 15. The same problems are still on the desk as they were when she left to go fight the campaign. Now, well, the future of socialism is a whole other debate and a whole other question. The tragedy, one of the many tragedies of Brexit, is that many of the causes, what people's lives are like, inequality, lack of housing, long waits to see the doctor, all of those things, we're going to find it more difficult to do something about them. One, because on any measure, the economy will be less strong than it would otherwise have been, and that means less tax revenue, and that means less money to invest in housing and in education and in the health service. And secondly, it occupies every waking moment in Parliament. And there's very little discussion, because obviously Brexit predominates, of all of these other things that we should be turning attention to. Now, I long for a change of government where we have the chance to bring about many of the changes that I think our country needs. But at the moment, we are damaging the economy, and we have to minimise that damage. That is a rational thing to do, given the circumstances. And we need somehow to find a way of resolving this so that society, Parliament, parties can turn their attention to the great social questions that, frankly, scar our nation, about which we need to do something. So, I mean, it's about doing it in the right order, is what I would say to you. Okay. Whose name is it? Yes.
Hi, I'm Darryl. I worked with you at England Council.
Did you? Now, what did you do?
All those years ago. Well, I worked with John Campbell.
Of course, Darryl, how nice to see you. Now, how are you?
I'm all right.
Are you standing here, working here?
I'm standing for the Labour Party in Hove for the council after government.
Which ward?
It's a green ward, Brunswick.
Okay.
And as I'm going round on the doorstep,
Yeah.
unfortunately local issues aren't to the forefront.
Right.
It's mine, it's national issues.
Okay.
And frankly, the Labour's position on Brexit and a second referendum. However, I'm clear that I fully support the Corbyn plan and Jeremy's letter, and I take it you do from what you've said. It's very difficult to find anything that you've said that I disagree with. What would you say
You
to...
sound almost disappointed. I'm only kidding.
No, I don't. What would you say, though, however, to people like Owen Smith and Chris Leslie, who
Yeah.
continually attack the Leader's plan and really seem to think that there is a possibility of a second referendum? What would you say to them now? I know what I'd say to them, and that's to shut up and support the Labour leader's plan. Because if we turn our back on that referendum result and campaign to leave, we're ignoring the fact that many of our own supporters feel disempowered from Westminster. And what I'm worried about is that if you ask for another 2-year extension, is that feasible given the current climate? But I specifically ask you to tell Owen Smith that you won't, for example, think of leaving the Labour Party, as he said today. He thinks that he could see himself in another party because of this.
Right. Let me respond very directly to that. Labour has always been, and I hope it always will be, Darryl, a broad church. And I don't believe in a Labour Party where whoever happens to be elected to a leadership position, the whole of the Labour Party then says, forget what I thought before, I agree with everything that that person says. Because it's not what Jeremy did when he was about then, was it? Yeah. So it is a strength, and we should respect that different people have different views, and those who are passionate about a second referendum, they would say they're frustrated that we haven't got on to that bit of the policy. Now, I'm standing before you as someone who has not been calling for a second referendum because I believe we have an obligation to seek to implement the result of the June 2016 referendum. But I have also said, if Parliament remains deadlocked, we can't go on just extending Article 50 and failing to reach agreement about what's going to happen. And in those circumstances, I've said, I can't see any alternative in order to resolve this, other than to go back to the British people. And in these circumstances, it would be, here's the only deal for Brexit that's been negotiated, the Prime Minister's, what do you think? And people would say, and you should also have Remain on the ballot paper. But then the Brexiteers say, that's Remain light. Where's the proper Brexit I voted for? Now, can you have a 3-part referendum? Is it by first past the post? Is it by the alternative vote system? Do you have a 2-round second referendum? And by the way, the thing that really matters, which is what Brexit means, our future relationship, currently we are none the wiser as to what it is. So it's a referendum, you could argue, completely the wrong time, because we don't know what the future relationship is. Which is why, in arguing for a complete change of approach, we could then come to take a decision, either Parliament or the people, depending on what the view is at the time, in the future. Now, I wrote to my members recently in Leeds Central, and I got a number of replies, and most of those who did reply, they said, yeah, I'd like to have a referendum. Can't we move to that policy now? So everyone's entitled to their view, and as far as I'm concerned, the answer to your very direct question, I wasn't quite born into the Labour Party, although Labour politics has been the story of my life. I joined the Labour Party when I was 17 years of age, and I intend to die in the Labour Party. But to those who look at that statement with glee, not just yet. Okay? So,
can we hear from the lady on the left?
Yeah.
You just.
Hi.
Sorry, can you just wave? Hi. Now, what's your name?
Jasmine.
Jasmine, hi.
Hi. I was just wondering how a no-deal Brexit will impact the import of pharmaceuticals.
The import of pharmaceuticals. It's a very, very good question. You have got, well, you've got medical treatments with radioactive isotopes that have a very, very short half-life, and you need to get them quickly to the patient. The honest answer is, what are customs going to do on day one of a no-deal Brexit? Now, no-deal Brexit is a disaster, but let me put the question. You're a customs officer and you're at Dover, and you come on shift, and the lorries are coming off the ferries. Are you going to go, yep, which is what they do at the moment. If you go to Dover and watch it, none of them wants to stop. It's like a continuous train set, up and down the ramp and off up the M20, servicing supermarkets, factories, bringing in pharmaceuticals, components, ingredients, you name it, a lot. Or do they say, stop, while I apply whatever rules I'm going to apply? Now, I think for Britain, the answer is they will do this, because we don't want to add to the problem. The really important question is, what are they doing in Canada? Is the EU going to charge immediately the common external tariff of the European Union on goods going from Dover to Canada? Are they going to say, I'm afraid if you're carrying animal products, we need to do phytosanitary checks. You may need new paperwork. You may need a rules of origin certificate. Because, of course, when the EU exports stuff to other countries around the world, the EU has about 40 trade agreements, Alan is the expert, with around 70 countries, and we have access to those markets, and there are certain rules about what constitutes an EU-made product. You have to have a certain percentage of EU content. Now, if there's British content, that won't count as EU content anymore, so the EU might find the car they've made has too much British content, and it won't then be accepted in the country. So it's what the customs officers do, and how the EU reacts, and how the other countries react. And the tragedy at the moment, and there was a briefing yesterday, is that the government brought together businesses and said, you know what, we've said for 2.5 years we'll have it all sorted. We'll roll over the 40 or so trade agreements we've got with other countries, so you can carry on as we do at the moment. And they've had to admit they've sorted almost none. None. So any British exporter who is exporting to those countries and takes for granted the current rules under which they do so is in for a very rude awakening. If those countries say, I'm really sorry you're not in the EU anymore, and therefore this doesn't apply. Other considerations. Approving ingredients. Now, I was talking to a manufacturer of medical products, not pharmaceuticals, cough mixtures and lozenges and things like that. At the moment, they can test what they make in Britain, and they can sell it in 27 countries. After we've left, if there's no deal, the EU will say, I'm terribly sorry, but I don't recognise your testing in Britain, because the testing was not done in an EU member state, and that company is looking at renting batch testing facilities in other EU countries. So they can say, don't worry, I tested my throat lozenges here in Paris, give me a certificate, I can sell it everywhere else. But that takes time, money, effort. And once you start moving functions to other European countries in order to keep the flow of trade, that probably isn't coming back. And once you have the testing facilities in another country, then maybe some of the scientists developing the new products will move there. And gradually, we are damaging our economy because people are moving elsewhere. So the honest answer is we're not absolutely sure, but the fact that the NHS has announced it is stockpiling medicines, the fact that Matt Hancock said recently, I'm the biggest buyer of fridges in the whole of the world at the moment, does tell us something about the concerns that those who run the National Health Service have about continuity of supply, given how uncertain we are about how things would work in the event of a pull the plug out no deal Brexit on the 29th of March. Do you work in this area? Do you have particular knowledge in asking the question?
Yeah, I suffer with cystic fibrosis, so I just want to be aware of kind of what's happening, how it's going to affect me on like a personal level. Right.
Well, we've got another battle for people with cystic fibrosis, which is Orkambi, which I'm sure you'll be very...
Yeah, I was meant to be part of the medical trial for it.
Ah. Does anyone know about... Basically, there's this drug called Orkambi that is made by... Is it Vertex?
Yes.
Yeah. And they... it said it has some therapeutic benefit for those who have cystic fibrosis. Vertex says we'll sell it to the NHS, but it's going to cost a whacking great amount of money. And the NHS has said, I'm afraid we can't afford that for all the people who have cystic fibrosis. And the campaign at the moment is to try and get Vertex to drop the price so that it can be made available to you and other people who have cystic fibrosis. So that's not Brexit related. Now that's another debate about the cost of medicines and making sure that they're available to people when therapeutic benefit has been shown by NICE. Now who's next?
Can we have the lady with the yellow scarf? Okay, and this gentleman here.
Right. You're first, sir. What's your name?
Ewan.
Ewan, hi.
Surely since Parliament voted against the only deal we have, we're just leading to a no deal.
Yeah. Right, okay. No, not quite, so I will try and explain why. Yes.
Hi, my name is Roseanne, and I've got a two...
Sorry, your name is?
Roseanne.
Hi.
I've got kind of two-part question. So I understand that you have expertise in the environment. So the first question is, there's such a preoccupation with Brexit at the moment in our political landscape. But do you think we should still be using preparing the political ground for legislation on climate change, such as bringing the Green New Deal to the UK? I've seen that Labour are actually quite in contact with the Sunrise Movement and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez at the moment, and they're in the process of that. Or do we need to use the Brexit chaos to sort of push through a sort of really radical transition to a zero carbon economy? Thank you.
Okay, very good question. I think the answer to... Oh yes, I beg your pardon, Ewan. No, I don't think it follows. Because the Prime Minister says there's only two choices. My deal or no deal. Well, those are not the only two choices. And I'm not accepting that there are only two choices. Because you could extend while you continue to try and find a deal that Parliament will support, or you could take a different approach, which is the one that I'm advocating, to negotiate a future partnership, which seems really very, very logical, given that we can't agree at the moment. And that's why she's in difficulty, because she thinks my deal or no deal will squeeze the vote. It may squeeze it a bit. She may, miracle of miracles. In the end, she says to the Tory Brexiteers, if she says to them, it's my deal or no deal, they think, I don't like your deal, no deal, it's fine by me. So they just wait for the clock to go down. But then she says to them, recently, she says, it's my deal or no Brexit, because she equates extending Article 50 with no Brexit. And then she says to them, well, be really, really careful what you wish for. You may hate my deal, but the alternative might not be no deal, it might be no Brexit. So, what do you actually want? Do you want Brexit on the 29th of March? No. That's the argument, in effect, which she's putting to them. Whether it has an effect, genuinely, I don't know. The inner workings of the Conservative Party and their policy the whole different world, which is not mine, that's her problem. But that's what she's seeking to do. But I resolutely reject there's only two choices. She could say, okay, we're going to be in a customs union. Well, that would be a start. But she won't do it. So I'm not voting for her deal because she won't shift in the direction of trying to reach out to get something that you can get a consensus for. That's not leadership. That is something else. Now, look, your question gives me a chance to make a point about one of the other consequences of Brexit, which is, I think it diminishes Britain's influence in the world. Now, for me, the overwhelming argument for remaining in the European Union was its achievement in bringing peace to our country. Now, this wasn't debated a lot, because people kind of tend to take peace for granted. I think it's always been like this. No, it isn't. Michael was killed in the Second World War, like lots of people in this country, they lost loved ones. My great-uncle was killed at Gallipoli in the First World War, and they never found his body. He's one of 22,000 names written on the Hell's Memorial in Gallipoli. Now, that's what we used to do. We used to kill each other, and the coal and steel community was created by people of enormous vision who said, you know what, if we combine our countries economically, we can make a return to conflict unthinkable. This was an astonishing bit of political courage, because it took former enemies and brought them together. Now, there are problems with the European Union, please don't get me wrong, and I didn't vote to remain because it's perfect. It's not. And you know what the European Union needs to reform. Whether Britain's leaving or not, it needs to reform. That's the first one. The second is, how do you have influence in the modern world? And it goes to the heart of the debate about sovereignty. People say to me, I want my sovereignty back. And I say, right, fine. Anyone here want their sovereignty back? Just, it's all right, you can stick your hand up. You can just pretend you want your sovereignty back for the purpose of this demonstration somewhere. Right, sir, I'm going to give you your sovereignty. Okay? Now, what we're all going to do is we're all going to leave this lecture theatre. We're going to shut the door. And the person who remains here is in the space of the, what's this lecture theatre called? Jubilee. You are completely sovereign. No one can tell you what to do. You're in control of your own destiny. The next question, however, is where does that get you? And the answer is it doesn't get you very far. And what do we do every single day of our lives? As people, as communities, as nations, we pool our sovereignty with others. We share it with others in the greater good. And having led the British delegation to the Bali climate change talks when I was the Environment Secretary, and I claimed no expertise, I got the job, and you learn the job. I saw how powerful it was when Europe, with one voice, said, look, this is what we are prepared to offer in the way of commitments to reduce CO2 emissions. Because in the end, tackling climate change it's about doing well, it's also about kind of mathematics. Because you can go around the table and say, what will you contribute? What will you do? What will you do? What will you do? And then you say, right, we've got these many tons of carbon in 5, 10, 15 years. You turn to the scientists, I'm sure the scientists in the room, so what does that mean for temperature increase? And they'll say, I'm afraid that's 3.5. And you turn around to everyone and say, everyone happy with 3.5 increase in global temperature? And everyone goes, no, we can't have that. Right, we need to go around again. You need to contribute more. Now, I saw the power of a single view from Europe in trying to influence other countries. And if you go back to 2007, which is when the Bali climate change talks were happening, at that time, China and India were saying, not wholly unreasonably, you lot caused the problem, you've had the benefits of carbon-based development, when you sorted out your problem, then come and ask us to sort out ours. To which my answer was, you're right, but there's one problem. If we could stop CO2 emissions in the whole of the EU, America, New Zealand, Canada, the OECD countries tomorrow, we still wouldn't have a serious problem, because what's out there, unless you can suck it back in, and the rising emissions in China, India, and the rest of the developing world as they industrialise. And what the Paris Climate Agreement, which was the culmination of a series, did was to get every country to say, we have to do our bit. And that has been a really profound change. And Britain is a country that built its wealth and power on the Industrial Revolution, conquest, empire. And then we swapped that. The empire wanted its freedom, other countries industrialised. And how do we have influence in the modern world? and the relationships that we build with other countries. And if we're going to tackle climate change, that's what we need. Because if you look at the big challenges, climate change is one, the movement of people around the globe, trade deals, threats to peace and security, refugee movements. You're only going to deal with those if you work with others. A mentality which says, I'm shutting the door, closing the curtains, the rest of the world go away, we'll just deal with ourselves, thereby lies ruin for humankind. We have to learn to cooperate. And having been the first country in the world to legislate for climate change legislation, and I happened to be a Secretary of State when the bill was introduced into Parliament, and you look at what we've done with our CO2 emissions, it shows that progress is possible. And I think the final thing I would say, and I apologise for the length of the answer, you've raised a really important point. This is about the future of our children and our grandchildren and the world that we share. We need to show people how the change is possible. And I think that's really important. Now, when I walked out of Parliament yesterday, there's a lot of adverts now the Mayor's put up for the ultra-low emission zone in London. So the debate about emissions and cars is in the process of being turned on its head, because people are saying, your emissions are damaging the health of my children. And we see the rising impact. And then the government says, right, by 2040, no diesel or petrol cars can be produced in Britain. But what do we see now? Technological change is beginning to bring on stream all-electric hybrid vehicles. And if you can generate the electricity from renewable sources, and you drive an all-electric car, well then you're contributing to tackling climate change while retaining the mobility that the motor car for some people gives them. So it's all of those ways of demonstrating how the change can be made, which is about political will and technology, raising awareness, people doing their bit in their community, the way in which they live their lives. That's what we need to do. And I fear that not being part of the European Union, where these big debates and discussions will be in the future, is not going to be good for our influence in the world. And that's another reason why I think voting to leave the European Union was a very, very profound mistake. Right, now sorry,
could you just pass, just to the lady directly above the last questioner. Yeah, and another one. Go on.
Okay, I'd like a quick, short question I want to ask. What do you think, Jackie, what can we learn from losing? Is it option one, it's the evidence of seizures of a post-colonial society in its last spasms of trying to deal with that experience, or two, is it what we learned from the Channel 4 film Brexit and Uncivil War, that an analytical company can come in and find 3.5 million unknown voters and somehow through their analytical system mobilise them? So what do we learn about that, and what are its implications for future elections and referendums? How do we deliver our messages better, and do we need IT firms like that to help us identify voices that weren't heard, spoken to, addressed or ignored for the future? So what can we learn from losing is the question.
That's a really good question.
Thank you.
And it's difficult to answer. I'll do my best. Who's next?
Sorry.
Sorry.
Go on.
Is it this gentleman here? Got the microphone?
No, it's a gentleman up here.
Without a microphone, as long as people can hear me.
Sorry, do you mind? Do you mind just waiting your turn? We'll get to you next. But we have got someone with a microphone already, so we'll just take the name first.
Sorry?
No, sorry. The gentleman in the middle. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah. I can hear you. Yeah. What's your name, sir?
Stavros.
Hi.
Hi. I want to ask you, there's been, Jeremy Corbyn's taken a hit in the polls recently, and I was looking at an analysis, and a lot of it, there's a perceived sort of perceived indecisiveness on his stance on Brexit, and him maybe sort of downplaying that, trying to get into Parliament, rather than dealing with issues as they come through Parliament. I was wondering what you thought about that, if you had any critiques of Jeremy or sided with him.
Okay. Now, what can we learn from losing? I met a lot of people during the referendum campaign who they knew exactly what they were doing in voting to leave the war. So I know the argument in parties advanced, lots of people were unduly influenced by a lot of stuff, to think stuff think things that they wouldn't have thought if it hadn't been for all the messages. And I think that misses the fundamental point, but clearly that very sophisticated campaign, about which we are discovering more now than we knew before, I think had some impact. But I'm not one of those who says the whole thing was a fraud and we must cancel the referendum, because that misses the politics. It completely misses the politics, in the same way when people write to me and say, it was only an advisory referendum, you don't have to honour it. I'm sorry, you missed the point. It was not. It was not. First point. Secondly, you quite rightly identify lots of people who have never voted in a general election before came out and voted in a referendum. And that's true in my constituency, where the turnout is traditionally lower than in the leafy, most prosperous suburbs. And I think some of those people then voted in the 2017 election because they, having experienced casting a vote and having impact, they thought, well, give it a go again. And I want people to participate. I think, however, you are also right that the impact of change in our society, the disappearance of old industries, this is a long-term process. Of course that's had an impact, because if you worked in a community where there was the steel factory or the pit or whatever it was, and there was a reasonable level of employment, the wages were good, it was hard work, and then suddenly that goes, and it's warehouse or call centre, it's 0 hours, it's insecurity, and that is what's on offer for you if you lost your job down the pit, or your children as they leave school. People would be pretty angry about that. And if I could extend the analogy to a university, if the same thing happened to people who work in a university, that the old type of employment with security was replaced by all of that, well, everyone here would be pretty angry too. So, one needs to understand. Now, was that the fault of the European Union? No. After all, if you go to Pennsylvania and Michigan and Ohio, where my mum was born, it's exactly the same process that's taken place there. Now, what Trump did was at least to talk about the effects. And a lot of people voted for him, not because I think they believe he will bring back well-paid mass manufacturing jobs to Ohio, Pennsylvania and Michigan, so at least he understands, by talking about it, what those people feel, and they thought a lot of people in politics and public life didn't talk about it at all. Now, at the same time, we're still the 6th strongest economy in the world, and lots of new industries have come. Because if we went back 50 years, and someone at Sussex invented time travel, and you came forward to 2019, and you went back, you'd say, well, I bring you really bad news from the future. Well, tell me what? All those people who work in steel, shipbuilding, mining, textiles, all those jobs are going to go. People would have said, well, we're done for. We're going to have mass unemployment, the country's going to be in a terrible mess. But what nobody saw was the impact that technological changes would bring in terms of new jobs in industries. Now they require different skills, and therefore the skills that we give ourselves and the next generation are really important to keeping our economy strong. Being an open economy is important. Why do we have, at the moment, although it's under threat, a strong car industry? Because I can remember when the British car industry was on its last legs. Why? Because the UK was the most successful country in Europe in attracting foreign direct investment. That's why Toyota came. It's why Honda came. It's why Nissan came, because they can manufacture and export all over the European Union. And in Washington, in the northeast, Nissan is a very big, important employer, good wages. So, it's a complex story. But you asked absolutely the right question about the implications for the way in which we conduct campaigns, because then is there foreign influence, how is that being used? And the truth is, I think electoral law finds it really quite difficult to keep up with new and different forms of campaigning. How do you regulate it? Because you say to me, you can only spend this amount on leaflets that are in your re-election campaign. What does that mean for tweets and how they are, or Facebook postings and how they are paid for? And I think the Electoral Commission will be the first to say we're trying to catch up with that. And it's really important we have that debate, because if there is a lack of confidence in the democratic process, then we're all in big trouble, whatever political views we say. Now, Stavros. Yeah, Well, actually, the letter that Jeremy sent yesterday, I thought was pretty darn decisive, because having been to see Mrs. May to express a view, he said, well, here are the things that we're looking for. Now, that's what leadership is about. And the question is, how's the Prime Minister going to respond? And I'm afraid on current indications, she'll go through the list. Well, certainly on the close relationship with the single market and the customs union, she'll say no. Workers' rights, she might do something, because she thinks that might persuade some Labour MPs to vote for her. Deal, future participation in EU agencies, well, that's not an offer at the moment, given what she is proposing. So I think it's put the challenge over to her, but I fear, as you'll gather from what I've said already, that she is not going to respond. Now, who's next?
The gentleman in the black.
Thank you very much. Peter Holmes, I work with Alan on UKTPO, and I've given evidence to you.
You have indeed. Nice to see you.
See you.
Thank you for coming.
I find your proposal of extending the pre-accession, the Article 50 notice very good. We actually, I think, advocated it a long time ago. But I wonder how you respond to two rather fundamental problems with this. The first is that the other member states have said they'll only have an extension if the UK has a clear strategy which we can put to them for implementation.
Yeah.
And the second is that the most common interpretation of the treaties is that you can't have a definitive end state decision, you can only have a political declaration. And so what you appear to be suggesting appears to go against what the member states have said. So I'm afraid it's a nice idea. I'd love to make it work.
You're very kind. I'll try and answer that on the important point you raised.
The gentleman in the grey sweater. Yeah.
Sir, your name?
Vincent.
Hi.
I'm afraid I'm only talking here. I'd like to hear more of the younger people expressing things, but what I want to express is the difficulty now for a lot of people who supported Remain and who are still there. At the moment, there's Theresa May pushing a Brexit, and there's Jeremy Corbyn sitting on the fence and pushing Brexit as well, because they have accepted referendum. And to my mind, referenda is a dreadful means of appearing to be democratic. It's not. It's a populist way that usually right-wing politicians use to manipulate. And it leads to division. And look at the division we've got. And so the trouble is, because both the main leading parties are still fixed on following that referendum, the people who want to remain, and there are probably now more people who want to remain, feel that the only thing they can do is have another referendum. Goodness me, what will be the result? Let's be optimistic. 55% want to remain and 45% don't. It will just be as divisive all over again. What we haven't seen from Jeremy Corbyn is what I feel that he could have done, is said, Remain, but let's go in there and fight for the things that we really want to change in the European Union. What is your response to that sort of approach? And how could those people who still strongly feel that remaining is important can get their voice heard?
Many people, I'm just going to deal with your point first of all, and then I shall come back to Peter's. Many people feel very strongly in the way that you eloquently express. The problem is we did have a referendum, and we lost. Now, in politics, you learn quite early on, sometimes you lose. And the political challenge then is, what do you do about the fact you've lost a referendum? Because if someone were to come out and say, I just want to cancel the Article 50 process, withdraw the letter, it's always a mistake. Forget it. As I indicated earlier, I think the damage to confidence in our legal system would be enormous. And that is not a step that I support. The only people who could cancel Brexit are the British people themselves. That's the only way. Now, whether you think that Harold Wilson was a right-wing demagogue, he used the referendum to deal with the problems, as I mentioned earlier, in the Labour Party over Europe at the time. He was just much more successful in winning, like a margin of 2 to 1 than David Cameron, who thought he was going to win and didn't succeed. You're right that a complex issue was reduced to a very simple question in which there's many different answers, and that's what we're struggling with the consequences of at the moment. I think if we ever did get to another referendum in which Remain was on the ballot paper, whether Europe demonstrates its willingness to reform would be really important as to whether Remain would have a chance of winning. Because I would argue, if you had a referendum tomorrow, Remain versus the Prime Minister's deal, and that was it, 2 choices, I think it's not beyond the realms of possibility that the Prime Minister's deal would win. Now, other people in the audience may take a different view, but I just think I would say that. Because it's not, although there's some movement in public opinion, judging by the polls, it's very hard to tell, it's not as overwhelming as some argue, and if you feel very strongly about it, you think it's obvious we should remain, and people we talk to all say it's obvious we should remain, we think everybody thinks it's now obvious we should remain. That's not what everybody thinks. We have a very, very divided country indeed. And I just make another point about referenda. We had a referendum in Scotland about devolution. Now, the Labour MPs were bitterly opposed to devolution for Scotland. The Scottish people voted for it. Should Parliament have turned around and said, you know what, no, we know better than you, we're not having devolution for Scotland. You see, we have used referenda for a variety of purposes. I think for major constitutional change, in my own view, that's where it is legitimate, because it's about consent. We should have had one when we went into the common market in 73. We didn't have one until 75, and then by then people didn't want to come out. Because you are, as a parliamentarian, you're then ceding sovereignty on behalf of the people to a bigger entity for good reason. I think you ought to ask the people who gave you your ability to do that in the first place, namely the people who elect us. So you need to pick the issues. I'm not in favour of running the country by referendum, just to make that absolutely clear. I'm not. Now, extending Article 50. Yes, you're right. The EU says, if we're going to give you more time, what's it for? If it's for an election, fine. Referendum, fine. If the government said we're having a major rethink on our policy, we need a bit more time, probably. I think they'll give it to us anyway, even if we just say we can't go over the cliff, can we have a few more months? On your point, it is true that they could only sign an agreement with a country that is leaving once it's left. But it is not the case, in my view, that they cannot negotiate what the terms of that agreement will be, even though they can't sign it till afterwards. And I'll give you this example. If you look at the political declaration, most of which is vague and woolly, a menu of all possibilities, there is one paragraph that is really quite specific. And it is paragraph 23 of the political declaration, where it says the parties have in effect agreed there will be no tariffs. Now that's a very significant phrase. It doesn't say there will be 0 tariffs. 0 tariffs is what happens between 2 trading blocks. No tariffs suggests you're talking about customs duties, Prime Minister can't say that. But if you can negotiate now something as specific as no tariffs, why can't you negotiate something as specific as British access to the SIS2 database on people who might do bad things to us and we need to share the information, or decide now whether we're going to continue to participate in the European Medicines Agency, going back to the question that was asked up there about medicines or aviation safety, or we're going to cooperate on sanctions policy, trying to deal with what Russia's up to. The fact is, if there is a will, I think you do. It would require the EU to stand on its head as far as the negotiation structure is concerned. But the thing that we have going for us in arguing for that is you're frustrated with us because we can't agree on a deal at the moment. And the reason is nobody knows what the future is. Why don't we negotiate the future? It's actually a terribly simple idea. I don't claim authorship of it at all because I've heard others make the same suggestion and I've picked it up. Seems to be a really sensible step to take, given the mess that we're in. So I think it's doable, if there's a will, but it would require the EU to say, okay, we've had a major rethink. Now, I think the chances of that happening are pretty remote, but that's not an argument for not trying to advance the case. Right, who's next?
Yeah, just a lady in the yellow sweater, and if we can hear from the lady in the orange sweater now.
Okay.
Hello, my name's Jo.
So your name is?
Jo.
Hi.
Hi. I've got a question on Scottish independence.
Oh, yes.
So Brexit arguably represents the failure of the centralised Westminster model of democracy. And as Fintan O'Toole has shown, Brexit correlates strongly with English nationalism. Therefore, is Scottish independence not looking increasingly sensible from a democratic perspective?
Ooh. Can I answer that one?
Go for it.
Fresh in my mind. What was the first thing you said about a centralised...
Basically, if Brexit arguably represents a failure of the centralised Westminster model of democracy.
Well, I don't think a referendum of all of the citizens of the United Kingdom is a reflection of a centralised model of democracy, because everyone's got one vote, whether they live in Scotland or Sussex or wherever it is. Now, Scotland voted to remain, Northern Ireland voted to remain, Wales voted to leave, England voted to leave, London voted to remain, Leeds just voted to remain, Boston and Lincolnshire voted pretty darn heavily to leave. But we add all the votes up and we get a result. Now, I'm against Scottish independence. It goes back to the answer I was giving to your question. We need to cooperate and work with each other. And the United Kingdom is a particular kind of union. We could debate at length the lack of devolution in England. We have devolution in Scotland. We have devolved government in Northern Ireland not functioning. It needs to function. We have it in Wales. We don't have it in England. England remains a very centralised country. Why am I against Scottish independence? Because, and they're practical questions, the SNP can't tell us what currency they have. They get more funding per head of population than my constituents get. I think Scotland has actually a pretty good deal. It has a lot of devolution, but it has the strength that comes from the unity of being part of the United Kingdom. If Scotland had been independent 30 years ago and the Royal Bank of Scotland went bust, would Scotland have been able to bail out their own bank? No, they wouldn't.
No, but Scotland could remain in Europe and use the euro, and then...
Well, I know, but they didn't, you see, but they didn't want to say it. It used to be their policy, we're going to use the euro, and then they realised, well, the euro not very popular, so we won't say we're going to use the euro, we might tag along with the pound. Do you remember the famous answer Alexander gave when he said, I offer you not one, not two, but 3 options for a future currency? Well, if you're serious about being an independent state, could you agree on one currency so everyone knows what the deal's going to be? I don't mean to be harsh. Well, I do in respect to Alexander in that respect.
But how do you feel about having Trident outside Parliament on the Thames?
Well, since I support the nuclear deterrent, I wouldn't have a problem about that because it helps to keep us secure. Now, I realise the SNP doesn't like the base at Faslane, but Scotland too is protected by an independent nuclear deterrent, as London is currently. Now, if they want an independent state without a nuclear deterrent, well, that would be their choice. But if they join the European Union, having left, and they're in the single market in the customs union, and England is not, we won't be worrying about the border in Northern Ireland. We'll be worrying about the border at Carter Bar. How many of you have driven over the border at Carter Bar? Because it's a wonderful view as you come up the hill and down and you look at the lowlands of Scotland before you. Do you really want a border, a trading border, with your biggest market for Scotland, which is the rest of the United Kingdom? Now, I just don't think it adds up. My grandmother came from Paisley, and my dad always used to say, he said, I really don't like the thought that the land of my mother's birth might become a separate country. That was his emotional argument against Scottish independence. The SNP can continue to advocate for it. But they have, in this sense, they have a bit of a trouble with respecting that referendum result because they lost, and they want another one. But at the moment, I don't think Scottish people want another referendum, and the polls don't indicate they would win, so there isn't going to be another referendum. But I argue we should remain in the customs union and single market, the whole of the United Kingdom, and that would diminish the argument of the SNP to go for independence, because they say we want to stay in the single market and customs union. I actually agree with them on that. So let's make them of course. As in fairness on that, they are doing in the House of Lords. Can I ask you, are you in favour of Scottish independence?
Yes.
You are? Fine. Okay.
And I've got one last thing.
Yes, of course.
I just want to know, How is it there are no consequences for the corruption that politicians, when they blatantly lie to people, why is there no consequences to corrupt politicians?
What do you think you are?
For example, you know, the money that was promised to the NHS is a prime example.
Well, vote Matt next time is what I say. If you don't like what your politicians do, vote them out, because you have the power to do that. That's how we are held to account. Now, I absolutely share your criticism. That's what I said earlier. All the fantasies, they were fantasies. We can have, you know, I wasn't familiar with the concept of cakeism before the EU referendum, but I am now. We can't keep all the good bits and get rid of the bad bits. We have to make choices. And now it's become painfully obvious that that is the case. But if you don't like what Boris Johnson said on the side of the bus, well, then you probably need to move to Uxbridge and South West.
Can we please hear from the lady in the yellow shirt?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Hello, my name is Fran.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I am very disappointed with the way that Brexit has gone overall. I was very disappointed with the result. But the time since that has turned out to be far worse than I even anticipated. And I think one reason is that there has been a lack of leadership on all sides, really. There has been a failure to determine policy. There has been a sort of cowardice, really, on the part of the Labour Party, part of the leader, lack of leadership, failing, you know, failing to make his own ideas explicit and fight for them, whatever they might be. And Theresa May, as we know, has been a total byword for obscurity, really. I'm wondering if we could, I personally would like a second referendum, and I'm still campaigning for one. But in the meantime, to improve policy making, do you think citizens' assemblies might have a role to play? Because it seems to me that the political class, and I'm not alone in thinking that, has failed us really. And to bring it down a layer, to give people the chance to think things through, might provide some sort of way of getting us out of the current impasse.
Right, well, I hear what you say and the force with which you say it, and the blue pass has failed. I didn't vote for Brexit, and nor did you, I guess.
No.
Nor did many of us.
I campaigned very
Right,
actively.
okay. Well, I don't know about this audience, but the mess we're in at the moment is a result of the majority voting for Brexit.
Sure.
Now, is that a failure of the middle class? That is a decision of the British people in the referendum.
No. Yeah. But the failure I see is the way it's been treated since then.
What?
In my opinion, if I had been Prime Minister, first of all, I would have scarpered, as David Cameron did.
Yeah.
But having seen him go, I think Theresa May should have said, fine, we have voted, you have voted to leave. We have various options open to us now. That should have been made clear at the beginning, not saying something like Brexit is Brexit. All of them have advantages and disadvantages, and now we're going to work our way through it. And if she didn't do it, someone else should have done on the other side of the house.
I agree with you completely. I really do, because the nation was divided, and a good leader in those circumstances, after all, the Prime Minister was a modest Remainer.
Yes.
But she became the leader of a party that was heavily supporting Leave, and the dynamics of that are all very difficult. But that would have been a sensible thing to do. So it's no good now, 2.5 years later, when she's defeated by 230 votes, saying, well, I want to reach out and listen. I pinched the phrase from someone else. It's no good saying the door is open if your mind is closed. And that's the position we find ourselves in. Now, I can't undo the past. There are a whole load of politicians who I think have been very honest and very honourable in saying there are choices. You read the many select committee reports that we have published. We've tried to scrutinise the process and point things out, saying that these things are going to be necessary and the government hasn't made those choices. And so I get exactly why you say what you say. Some people equate leadership with standing up and saying, I personally will vote to cancel Brexit. Some people argue that. I've tried to explain why I don't think Parliament could do that. The people couldn't, but Parliament couldn't. And I've come here today to argue for a different approach, which would force us to face the choices, which we will. And then it's a conversation we can have. Citizens' assemblies, I think they have a role in some issues, and I don't mean to disappoint, but I'll tell you what I think. I don't think we can solve the problem of Brexit by picking 250 people at random and say, you know, the whole of the nation is split, Parliament is split, over to you. Can you sort this out? Because I don't think it would work. And either we are saying, right, we're having another referendum, we're going to give it to 250 randomly chosen people. I don't say that disrespectfully, it's just how do you pick 250 people? And say, right, you're going to decide what's happened in Brexit, whatever you recommend, we're going to go and do. I don't think you can do that. But I do agree that the choices that we face have not been as discussed publicly as they should have been, and that's why people who then write to me and say, I just want to leave with nothing. The trouble is, when people feel that strongly, in my experience, they're not terribly amenable to an argument about choices. They've just said, I never want to see you again, and I'm going. And that's a feeling, and they feel it genuinely, and they feel it very strongly. They feel that they were offered a proper Brexit, and they're not getting a proper Brexit, and they're angry about the fact they're not getting a proper Brexit. And we, as politicians, failing or otherwise, are having to manage this cacophony of advice and opinion. You look at my email box every day, one half and the other. And one is trying to find a way in which we can come through this in the middle. In the end, will not satisfy everyone, but would be for the nation a sensible outcome. Now that's, I already said that's what I'm trying to do, but I hear many people who say our politicians are not doing a good enough job. So I don't take it personally, honestly. No point.
Can we hear from the Can we hear from the gentleman in the black glasses at the top?
My name's Berkan.
Sorry, can you just wave for the comment? Oh, hi. Sorry, what's your name?
Berkan.
Hi.
Do you think by extending Article 50 would not create a rise in the far right, like UKIP, for example? And also, do you think that also the far left, not everyone on the far right votes for Brexit? But do you think that would happen? And if so, how would you deal with that? And the trust that it would have in Parliament, for example?
Yeah. Can I just hear while it's fresh in my mind? It's a very important question that you've asked, because the risk is people would say, you're extending Article 50, this is just a not too subtle method of cancelling Brexit. And therefore, as I indicated earlier, you could try and reassure people at that point by saying, right, we'll now legislate to show that when we have the final deal, well, we all know what Brexit is, because we don't know at the moment. Everyone has their own version of Brexit in their head, but we don't have it in front of us. The Britain will go out to British people and say, is that the Brexit you wanted? Now that would, in part, the trouble is the leavers say, we don't want another referendum because we think it's going to go the other way. And we've been asked once, and we're going to have best of 3 or 5, and all of those arguments. And politicians have to deal with that. But that would be one way of dealing with it. Now, there may be new parties formed, as Raz has talked about forming a new party that would be a proper Brexit party, and if we were the majority in government, we'll just take the UK out of the EU like that. And that will be the end of the matter. So that will only happen if people vote for that. So if you don't want that to happen, please don't vote for it. Because we all have a responsibility for how we cast our vote, whether in a referendum or in an election. And if there are consequences, then we need to realise we were part of creating those consequences depending on how we vote. So please get stuck in, please participate. The worst thing is to see the consequences and you never voted in the first place. That's a small advert for participation in our democracy. That is next.
Gentleman in the red sweater.
In answer to the first question, I'm an MP murdered in the streets before the referendum, so fascism's already here, what happens with Brexit.
Yep.
I'm from Warrington in northwest of England, which suffered a bombing from the IRA in 1993. So I and the rest of the members of my town see the peace in Northern Ireland as being a concern for the whole United Kingdom, not just for one part of it. And I, in the weeks after the referendum, just happened to be in Northern Ireland, and I walked down the Shankill, and I walked down the Falls Road, and there was nothing. There was no sense that there was any threat. The sense that members of my family 30 years before had been down the same roads in tanks. So, you know, Northern Ireland, for me, and my question is, how can we accept Northern Ireland and the backstop being treated as a political football? Why was this not talked about in the referendum campaign? It's a member of the Union. It's a member of the Union. People in Northern Ireland have been using that. But Northern Ireland is a member of the Union. And peace and prosperity in a member of the Union was at threat. Violence that happened on the doorsteps in England is now perhaps closer than it's ever been in my lifetime. I was born in 1994. How is it acceptable that Northern Ireland, the people of Northern Ireland, have been treated like a political football rather than citizens of the Union, and people were fearful about their futures? Do you not think the Remain campaign and the Leave campaign neglected their responsibility by not talking about Northern Ireland enough during the referendum? And do you think it's acceptable? Because I didn't hear it, and I was a staunch Remainer. I didn't hear it. And I think now it's been treated as a political matter to be dealt with, rather than the real lives of real people across the United Kingdom. I think people need to stop talking about Ireland as a political problem to solve. These are people's lives, and the sooner people wake up to that, the sooner they wake up to the realities of Brexit, quite frankly.
I agree with you completely, and when you go to Northern Ireland and talk to people, they will make exactly the same point as forcefully as you have done. I think now, I was thinking back as you asked me a question to the referendum campaign, to what extent it was debated. I think probably not a lot, but then maybe I didn't think at that time that in practice a government would turn up and say, we're leaving the single market and customs union. So, which then made it a problem. So it was Mrs May who caused it in the first place. I think the backstop is not a problem because it's essential for the reasons I set out earlier. And so I said to people, the withdrawal agreement doesn't keep me awake at night. It's the political declaration that is the problem that I'm concerned with. Now, you know, the DUP say we cannot have a border down the Irish Sea, as a matter of principle, even though there are some checks at the moment on stuff going from the UK to Northern Ireland. And when that was discovered, they said, well, okay, maybe, but we don't want any more. So that's one problem. On the plus side, in fairness to everybody, every party in this negotiation agrees that the border must remain as it is. And I think that does demonstrate that people do get what the Good Friday Agreement has brought. They do, but the argument at the moment is about how to achieve that. It's not about whether that is a good thing to achieve. Because Michel Barnier will be as eloquent about the importance of protecting the peace process as Theresa May or Jeremy Corbyn or anybody else. But I think we're focusing on the wrong thing, the backstop. Because the best way to render the backstop irrelevant is to negotiate the future relationship. I don't mean to be a cracked record, but I am. Because that's how we solve the problem. Not by a legal protocol over here and an interpretation over there. It's actually irrelevant to the problem. The problem is an unwillingness to face up to policy choices, number one, and two, a failure to have negotiated the new relationship. Can we please do that in the interests of keeping Northern Ireland as it is, the peace and the prosperity and the security? I've got members of the committee who remember sitting in cars at checkpoints when they're going to visit their family members in the Republic or in Northern Ireland. They've lived with this in their lifetime. And when you say in tanks, you had family in the military?
People I knew that, people in the military, but also people who were literally just going to meetings in Belfast and had to deal with bombings. I think this is the thing with people in this audience, and I myself, I don't remember it. I'm born in 1994. Well, I don't want to remember it, but it's the fact, I think that's the danger, that there's a generation of people that it doesn't make sense, whereas perhaps for other people, the threat of violence from Northern Ireland is very real.
It is. Look, I think the nation's divided to those who remember it. I will always remember the the night I heard an IRA bomb go off in London. I was in bed, and it's a very particular sound, which is not a bang. And I got up because I thought it must be the high street, 100 yards from where I was. It was actually 2 miles away, in Chelsea, I was living in Kensington. So I remember that. I remember getting on the tube and looking out for bags that had no owner. That's what you used to do in London in the 1970s on the Underground. That's what happened. And I remember watching the news, like lots of us of a certain age, night after night, the bombings, the shootings, the murders, the sectarianism in Northern Ireland. Now, not all of that has gone away, but it is a transformation. And one of the problems with human beings sometimes is we can very quickly take what we have for granted. And a really important lesson of this, it has to be nurtured and worked at and protected and guarded and fought for, because just because things are like that today doesn't mean they will necessarily be like that tomorrow and the day after for our children. And that, it seems to me, is the most important lesson. So thank you for expressing that with such passion, which I'm sure it had an impact on everyone in the hall.
Yeah, I've got time for a couple more questions. Okay. Any hands? Yeah, can we have the lady in the green, I think it's green coat, and the lady in the blue jacket? I'm sorry, we've actually already got someone with the mic. Who has the mic? Yep, you, go on.
Hello, just a quick question.
Sorry, can you wave again, because I can't quite... Can you wave so I can see where you are? Yes. What's your name?
Tom.
Hi.
Just a short question. Why do you think there's a real lack of attention and debate on the second referendum, given the fact that the Leave campaign to have found to have broken spending rules?
Okay. Well, I don't think there's a lack of attention. There is a campaign, there's people petitioning and so on. I tried to indicate in earlier answer to your question that those who say we should do it again because the last one was corrupt, I think it misses both the practicality and the politics. If people acted illegally, then the law should be brought to bear in terms of fines, or if they acted criminally to be prosecuted. That is an independent decision for the prosecutors. It is not for politicians to take that decision. But secondly, I would say, as things stand at the moment, there is not a majority for a second referendum in Parliament. And if there were to be a second referendum, there would have to be a majority in Parliament, and there isn't. And we haven't had a vote on the second referendum because those who advocated don't want to put it to the vote because they know it would lose by quite a margin. And therefore, if there isn't a majority in Parliament, until that changes, there is not going to be a second referendum. And while we aspire to the best and hope for the best in life, including on this, we then have to say, well, if that's not going to happen, what is it we need to do now? Number one priority, stop a no-deal Brexit. Because wherever you want to go after that, whatever it's a second referendum, Norway, Canada, whatever, we can come together around saying no to a no-deal Brexit, which is what Parliament did last week, which is why we need the Cooper Bill, when we come back to it in 2 or 3 weeks' time, to ensure that we can tell the Prime Minister you're not doing it to our country.
Lady in the blue.
Hi. So my question is, how's the campaign? My name is Elsa. How's the campaigners get away with projecting anti-immigration sentiments in order to influence voters?
When you say how do they get away with
When the whole Brexit thing happened, my parents are both refugees, came to this country in 1998 from Kosovo, and we were at home watching the news and saw that Nigel Farage used the photo of refugees walking as a way to drive his campaign. And obviously the whole backdrop, or one of the backdrops of Brexit, was this whole anti-immigration crap. So, yeah, that's the question. Why does this happen, basically?
Well, it happened because that's what Nigel Farage thinks, and that's the poster that he ordered up, and that's the one he stood in front of, and that's the argument that he made. Now, a lot of people were shocked by what they saw. What did I find on immigration? I met very few people in the referendum who said, I'm voting for Brexit because I want all immigration to stop now. Very few. In the main, people said, we need immigration. but I want to have some control, which is why I said earlier, control is the absolutely key word to understand the referendum. So after all, we have immigration control for non-EU migration. Now, if you ask me, do I believe in immigration control? I do. I'm not in favour of an open door policy for the United Kingdom. I do believe in immigration control. Ironically, net migration from the parts of the world that we do control is currently higher than from the European Union, which we allegedly don't control. The numbers have reduced. Some people are going back because they feel uncertain about their future in this country. And the debate about migration is very, very complex to do with identity and community. And people will say, well, I'm not talking about so-and-so who lives next door. It's somebody else they're talking about. And I hear that often on the doorstep. Or if you say to them, if someone came to me and said, Mr. Benn, I've come to see you because my knee operation's been cancelled at the LGI in Leeds. Why has it been cancelled? They haven't got any nurses. Why haven't we got any nurses? Well, they say the government visas for nurses have run out. I guarantee my constituents would say to me, can you persuade the government to issue more visas? Because you're then having a rational discussion about what is our need for migration. The same is true of carers. The biggest social challenge we face in this country is caring for a growing elderly population, people like me in not many years' time, and one or two others in the audience. Who is going to be getting us up in the morning, washing our faces, and you know, you don't think about it till it happens to your grandparents and your parents. And I've been through that both. And you know, that moment when, you know, my dad was unwell and us siblings said, what are we going to do about him and how's he going to be cared for? And this is a universal experience. And it will come to us all. However invincible we feel now, we need migration to help deal with that, because most of the people who cared for him towards the end of his life, they or their families had come from other parts of the world to contribute their skill, their love, their compassion to looking after people in Britain. And I'm a son of an immigrant. I say this on the doorstep sometimes. They say, Mr. Benn, I don't like all these immigrants. I say, what do you have against my mum? And they look very confused because they don't know what I'm talking about. But as I said, my mum was from Ohio. She was an immigrant. So I think we need an honest debate about the need for migration in our country. I think if the EU had said, okay, you can control free movement if you want to, then I think the referendum would have been won. I think if the EU were to say that now to us and other countries, I think Remain would have a good chance of winning the future referendum, because it was probably about that issue more than anything else. The irony in Europe is the migration is a huge issue, but it's, as you all know, it's refugee migration in Europe, whereas in here it was more EU migration, even though we have received and given shelter, as we have a long and honourable tradition of doing, to many people who have fled persecution in other parts of the world. And if you ever come to any of my advice surgeries, you will see many, many people who have come to this country because they've had to flee the land of their birth because of oppression, violence, and the rest who have come to make their lives in the United Kingdom and are contributing. So we need to stand up for the principle and to call out those who try and stoke fear against the other. Because in the end, we're not the other. We're all human beings, even if we may dress differently, speak a different language, profess a different faith. Inside, we are all the same, and we only need to be treated with respect and decency. We're not a bunch of people trying to overrun other people's lives. Good luck. Is that it?
That's it for questions. Is there anything you'd like to say?
No, I said far too much. Can I simply to say thank you very much for coming and for staying. I know that people have other things to go and do. Good luck with your studies. I always look back on my time at Sussex with great fondness. I was amazed how little work one kids you need to do with those days. I'm sure it's very, very good. Especially now.
It's not.
It's what?
It's not.
Okay, well, I played a lot of football, and I was telling Sophie, who is a student here, who is volunteering in my office at the moment. I once came all the way down from London, where I was living in my 30s, to play football. And the previous year, I managed to rupture my kidney playing football here at Sussex and spent 6 weeks in hospital. So It was a formative experience in life, and if I may leave you with one piece of advice, if you ever have the choice between rupturing your kidney or not rupturing your kidney, then I would advise you to take the not rupturing route, because you'll save yourself a lot of pain and aggravation, but we did win the match. And thanks for coming.
Okay, thank you very much for coming, and thanks to Hilary for joining us for a wonderful evening. We have two events coming up that might be of interest to you. One with the former Deputy Assistant Secretary General of